Leah knew the night shift wasn't just about driving. It was about witnessing the city's quiet transformations. The Line 23 bus route, a serpentine ribbon of asphalt connecting the industrial docks to the flickering neon of the inner city, was her personal domain from midnight to dawn. She knew every pothole, every flickering street lamp, and every shadow that stretched across the empty seats. But most of all, she knew Rafael. He wasn't a frequent rider, he was an institution. He boarded promptly at 1:15 a.m. at the forgotten stop by the old cannery, a place where only ghosts and shift workers usually waited. He was a violinist, though she'd never heard him play. His case, worn black leather, rested on his lap like a sleeping child, and the scent of cedar and old paper always clung to the air around him. He had eyes the color of worn velvet, perpetually distant, yet when they met Leah's in the rearview mirror, a spark, brief, electric and utterly silent, would leap across the length of the bus. Their communication was a ritual of silent courtesy, the low rumble of her engine, the flash of his transit pass, the soft clink of the case settling beside him. For months, this unspoken intimacy had been the only warmth in Leah's cold, lonely nights. She imagined the stories behind his calloused fingers, the music he carried, and the secret places he went after she dropped him off near the old rail yard. One unusually wet Thursday, everything changed. The rain hammered against the bus's windshield, making the city a smear of blurred lights. Rafael boarded as usual, but his stillness was gone. His hand trembled slightly as he fumbled for his pass, and his velvet eyes darted constantly, searching the empty street behind them. Leah felt a sudden, sharp anxiety tighten in her chest, a premonition stronger than the smell of diesel. "Everything all right, Rafael?" she heard herself ask, breaking their long-standing silence. He flinched, a slight tremor running through his shoulders. He didn't meet her eyes. "A rough night, Leah. Just a long night." His voice was a low, melodic baritone, exactly as she'd imagined it, but laced with an unmistakable thread of fear. He took his usual seat, but instead of settling, he stayed coiled, alert. 3 stops later, a sleek, black sedan, the kind of car that didn't belong on Line 23, tailed them for a block, its headlights obscured by the downpour. Leah's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. She glanced back. Rafael was holding his breath, his gaze fixed on the reflection of the car in the wet window. When she pulled up to his stop, he moved quickly, almost frantically. He stood on the steps, his coat collar pulled high, and nodded once, a silent farewell that felt final. "Be careful," Leah murmured, the words barely audible over the hiss of the air brakes. As he stepped out onto the curb, illuminated briefly by the taillights, a small, worn, leather-bound notebook slipped from his inner coat pocket and landed with a soft thud on the wet rubber floor. He didn't notice. He was already running, disappearing into the dark maw of an alley. Leah sat there, engine idling, until the black sedan screeched past, turning sharply into the same alley. He was being followed. A cold wave of certainty washed over her. She couldn't just drive away. She quickly locked the bus doors, grabbed the forgotten notebook and examined it under the dim interior light. It wasn't a scorebook. It was filled with frantic, precise handwriting, but it was all gibberish to her, a jumble of dates, times and cryptic 4-letter codes beside unfamiliar street names, codes like V14, R30 and N02. There were also hand-drawn maps of her very own Line 23 route, overlaid with strange symbols, cross-referenced with bus schedules, but marked in non-existent stops. Leah drove the rest of her route on autopilot, the notebook burning a hole in her uniform jacket. She spent the entire following day, her off day, staring at the codes, trying to fit the pieces together. The romance she felt for Rafael had instantly mutated into a frantic, protective obsession. She needed to know what he was running from, and more urgently, where he was. That night, back on Line 23, the air was thick with unease. At Rafael's cannery stop, a man was waiting. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark suit despite the hour, and he didn't carry a transit pass. He carried a heavy, silent authority that chilled Leah to the bone. She recognized the car from the night before, parked a block down. He boarded, his eyes scanning every inch of the bus, his gaze lingering on the empty seats where Rafael usually sat. He walked slowly past the driver's cage. "You the driver who works this route this time?" His voice was flat, metallic. Leah met his gaze, injecting steel into her own. "I am. Saw a man get off here the other night. Tall, dark hair, carrying a music case. You see him?" "Lots of people get on and off this bus, sir," Leah replied smoothly, trying to keep her hands steady on the wheel. "I don't memorize their faces." The man leaned closer, his scent expensive, menacing. "He left something behind. A small book, a little leather journal. If you happen to come across it, you tell me. You don't ask questions, you just call the company dispatcher, Mike, and tell him you found lost property D5. "Understood." He stepped back, revealing the unmistakable bulge of a weapon beneath his tailored jacket. He didn't wait for her reply, simply exiting the bus and melting back into the shadows. Leah's heart hammered against her ribs. Mike. Mike was the night dispatcher, a grumpy fixture at the transport depot and clearly a part of this. Rafael hadn't just witnessed a crime. He'd stumbled into something vast and organized, something that stretched right into her own workplace. The realization was terrifying, but it also crystallized her purpose. This wasn't just about a mysterious crush anymore. It was about saving Rafael and exposing a conspiracy. She spent the next few days in a blur, working her route, pretending to be the same reliable, anonymous driver, all while her mind was frantically mapping out the coded notebook. The codes finally started to make a horrible kind of sense, correlating to the city's less used transportation infrastructure. The bus lines, yes, but also abandoned subway spurs, rail transfer points and maintenance tunnels. The notebook's codes weren't destinations. They were pick-up and drop-off times. The non-existent stops were locations where the bus slowed just enough for a discreet transfer. V14 was a dead-end street near the old Vanna textile warehouse, precisely 14 minutes after the Line 23 bus passed that block. R30 was the rusted rail bridge at kilometer 30 of the disused rail line. This was a network, a clandestine system using the city's veins and arteries, the very routes Leah drove, to move things or people unnoticed. The armed man's urgency confirmed her deepest fear. Rafael had evidence of human trafficking, children being moved through the dark underbelly of the city's transport system. The knowledge propelled her, but the anxiety was compounded by the silence of Rafael's absence. She clung to their shared memories, those moments of fleeting connection, seeking reassurance. She remembered the one time the bus broke down, late, dark, and utterly isolated. He had been the only passenger. While she waited for the tow, they had sat on the curb sharing a single chipped thermos of weak coffee. The rain that night had been gentle, washing the neon into soft pools of color on the pavement. He had talked quietly about the deep, almost unbearable sadness that sometimes accompanied beautiful music. And she, Leah, the driver, had talked about the strange, intimate loneliness of knowing a city's secrets without ever having anyone to share them with. He had reached out then, his violinist's fingers tracing the chilled skin of her forearm, a touch so light it was almost a whisper, yet it set every nerve ending alight. In that moment, the isolation of the night was replaced by a dizzying, potent electricity. "You have fire in you, Leah," he'd murmured, his eyes dark with a hunger that matched the sudden, shocking pull she felt toward him. She remembered the heat rising between them, the shared breathlessness in the cold night air. If the tow truck hadn't arrived just then, shattering the spell, she knew they would have fallen into the kind of reckless, desperate intimacy born of sudden, profound connection. It was a memory that burned with the promise of what they could be, a promise that now felt desperately fragile. Using the coded timetable, Leah began scouting the locations during her day shifts. She found the Vanna warehouse, a deserted loading dock shielded from the street by stacked containers, a perfect blind spot. The R30 rail bridge was an even better location, accessible only by a steep embankment and offering a clear line of sight over the river. The logistics were terrifyingly simple, hidden in plain sight. Her investigation led her back to the transport depot. Mike, the dispatcher, was definitely involved. He often swapped drivers at the last minute, sometimes assigning them to special cargo routes that were never logged. She needed proof. She managed to get into the depot office under the pretense of a maintenance report. Mike's desk was littered with receipts and old manifests. Pushed under a dusty keyboard, She found a series of irregular freight bills, all signed off by a mysterious Project Phoenix, and authorizing the use of decommissioned transport tunnels beneath the depot, tunnels that were technically city property, but managed by the company. That was it. The tunnels. That was where the children were held, and where Rafael must have gone to gather evidence only to be found out. The notebook's final entry was the key: Phoenix exit, 0400, child transfer. The time was 4:00 a.m., the end of her route, precisely when the city was quietest. That night, she wouldn't finish her Line 23 run. She parked the Line 23 bus at an unscheduled stop, flipped the out-of-service sign, and slipped out the back maintenance hatch. The entrance to the decommissioned tunnels was concealed behind an old steam boiler in the depot's basement. It was dark, smelling of rust and stagnant water. Leah, armed only with a heavy-duty flashlight and the fierce resolve born of sudden love and righteous anger, descended into the earth. The tunnels were a labyrinth of cold, echoing concrete. She followed the disused rail tracks, the dust motes dancing in the beam of her light. She called Rafael's name, her voice small and absorbed by the damp air. Silence. Then, a low, rasping sound. A cough, followed by a grunt of pain. She rounded a bend and stopped dead. Rafael was there, slumped against a concrete support column. His white shirt was stained crimson, and his hand was pressed tightly against his side. The violin case lay open beside him, the polished instrument glinting faintly, unused. He looked thin, exhausted, but his velvet eyes were wide with relief when he saw her. "Leah, you shouldn't be here." His voice was a painful whisper. "I know your secret, Rafael, and I know Mike's." She knelt beside him, her hand going instinctively to his face, pulling his head gently against her shoulder. The intimacy of the gesture, the shared smell of blood and fear, was a terrible, beautiful affirmation of everything they hadn't said. "I saw them," he managed, gripping her hand. "They used the abandoned freight route to bring them in, the children. They were moving the last one tonight, a little girl. Maybe 5. I tried to get photos, but they cornered me." He showed her a small, deep cut on his flank. "It's bad. They'll be back soon to finish the job and move her." "Where is she?" He pointed down the tunnel, deeper into the darkness. "Old maintenance room, near the pumping station. You have to go. They'll use you against me if they find you." But as he said it, a voice echoed down the tunnel. Not Mike, the metallic voice of the armed man from the night before. "Rafael, you're making this harder than it has to be. Give up the evidence." Leah gripped Rafael's shoulders, the raw emotion of the moment crashing over her. There was no time for fear, only action. The memory of his fingers on her arm, the intense longing of that rainy night, fueled her. She kissed him, a fierce, desperate kiss that tasted of metallic fear and a sudden, undeniable future. "I'm not leaving you or that child." She found the evidence bag he had managed to secure, a thumb drive and a roll of developed film. "You hide. I'll go for the girl. We leave the evidence in the open, somewhere they'll see it, and then we run." "No, Leah, that's reckless." "Reckless is my Line 23 specialty," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I know these tunnels better than they do. I drive the arteries of this city. I know every dead end, every bypass." She used her bus driver uniform, the authority it conveyed, even in the darkness, to her advantage. She moved silently, parallel to the main tunnel, slipping through maintenance shafts and steam vents, hearing the armed man's search grow closer. She found the maintenance room. Inside, a small girl, no older than 5, sat huddled and weeping, clutching a worn teddy bear. Leah knelt down, her voice low and soothing. "Hey, sweetie. I'm Leah. I'm here to take you home." The girl, silent with terror, reached for her. Leah scooped her up, tucking the small body beneath her coat. The armed man, followed by Mike, entered the main chamber where Rafael was hiding. "We know you're here, Rafael. Give us the drive, and this can stop." This was Leah's chance. With the little girl safe on her hip, she used the last bit of courage and ingenuity she had. She had observed where the armed man had entered, and knew the main junction to be a hub of noise. She emerged from a dark side passage, not far from the main group, but unseen. Instead of running, she acted. She used the thumb drive Rafael had given her, plugging it into a dusty, antiquated maintenance computer she found in a disused control booth. She quickly accessed the tunnel's automated sound system, a relic used for emergency warnings. Using the mic, she sent her voice booming, distorted and deafening through the tunnels, echoing off the wet concrete. Code red, imminent structural collapse. All personnel evacuate via north access hatch. Police and fire en route. The noise was chaos. Mike and the armed man froze, their eyes wide with panic. The thought of a tunnel collapse was clearly a greater fear than the violinist. Leah used the momentary confusion, dashing back toward the original entrance. Rafael, hearing the alarm and the ensuing scramble, managed to crawl out of his hiding spot, pale but mobile. Leah reached him, the little girl clinging to her neck. "The main depot entrance is sealed," Leah whispered, hoisting the child higher. "We go the only way I know, through the old storm drain access on the Line 23 route map. It opens into the industrial zone." They moved slowly, painfully, Rafael leaning heavily on Leah, his breath shallow. The little girl, terrified but safe, kept her face buried in Leah's shoulder. They scrambled, climbed, and finally emerged, soaking wet and covered in grime, under the shadow of the Vanna warehouse, the very spot marked V14 on Rafael's map. They made it to a payphone Leah knew, and she called her only trusted contact, an old beat cop named Detective Miller, telling him she had a child, a wounded man, and evidence of a massive trafficking ring involving transport routes and internal company collusion. By morning, the city was buzzing. Detective Miller's team, armed with Rafael's coded logs, the photos on the thumb drive and Leah's testimony, descended on the transport depot. Mike and the armed man, who turned out to be the ringleader's chief enforcer, were apprehended trying to flee the tunnels. The entire network, built on the predictable rhythmic anonymity of the city's transport lines, was dismantled. Rafael was hospitalized. Leah, now a celebrated whistleblower, was placed on indefinite leave. She spent her days at his bedside. The day he was released, she picked him up in her personal car, a dented old sedan that smelled faintly of coffee and bus fumes. They drove to her small apartment, the air still fragile with all the things they had almost lost. Later that evening, the city lights were soft through her window. Rafael was sitting on the edge of her bed, his shirt loose, his scar a faint line on his side. He wasn't holding his violin. He was just holding her hand, his thumb stroking the skin of her palm, the same spot his fingers had traced on that rainy night months ago. "You saved me, Leah," he said, his voice stronger now, no longer laced with fear. "You didn't run. You chose to fight." "You gave me a reason to fight," she whispered, leaning into him, their faces inches apart. The distance between them, that professional boundary of the driver's cage, was finally gone, replaced by a consuming, shared reality. The weight of the world, the horror of what they had seen, made their connection exponentially more intense. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, the slow, rhythmic beat of his heart beneath her fingertips. His lips found hers tentatively at first, then with a deepening certainty that spoke of months of repressed longing. The kiss was not desperate, but a profound, sensual promise. A melody finally played after a long, silent rehearsal. His hands moved to the zipper of her jacket, slowly drawing it down. The rough metallic sound a counterpoint to the rush of her own blood. Every movement was deliberate, a sacred exploration. Her own hands, familiar with the rough textures of a steering wheel and the cold metal of a bus engine, now traced the smooth, warm expanse of his back, pulling him closer, melting the memory of their tense past into a soft, urgent present. There was a raw, palpable gratitude in the way they touched, a recognition that this moment was a gift bought with the cost of great risk. The rhythm they found was slow, insistent, and utterly focused, leaving no room for the outside world, only the singular, immediate reality of two people who had found love in the deepest, darkest corners of the city and brought it back into the light. In the aftermath, curled together in the soft sheets, the city's nighttime rumble outside sounded less lonely, less menacing. They had exposed the secrets of Line 23, rescued a child, and in the process, found each other. Rafael recovered fully and began teaching music at a children's center dedicated to helping those rescued from the shadows. Leah, unable to face the depot again, became a consultant for the city's public safety board, advising on blind spots in the transit system. They spent their evenings together, their lives intertwined by shared danger and a love that was now, finally, unguarded and real. The cello, which Rafael had swapped his violin for, now played its beautiful melancholy music in their small living room, a sound of healing and a promise of happy days.